So we digress.
We digress. Should we talk about introduce our guest right now?
I think he's probably waiting there wondering when we're going to do that.
Ryan, are you there?
I am here.
Hey, Ryan, welcome to the show, everybody. This is Ryan Honick.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Ryan, why don't you do us all a favor and just tell us who you are and what you do? Just a little mini bio, and then that'll lead us into today's subject.
Well, I think I'm just sorry, Ryan. Ryan would probably take a whole show telling us what he does after I read his bio. So he's a pretty impressive guy.
Yes, he is.
I appreciate that, and again, thank you both for having me on. No, I mean the Cliff Notes is that I'm in my day-to-day job, I do PR work for the federal government, but outside of that, and much of my life is rooted in disability activism, and specifically around access, but particularly around service animals and my service dog Pico. So that keeps me busy out of work because that's the life that I live.
That sounds like a full-time job as it is.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great work, and that kind of leads into what our topic for the day is. Really, we've talked before about this, but we just kind of hit on it, just kind of an informational way. But we went back and looked deeper into this issue. It's the animal support or emotional support animal and the emotional support dog, and what that means, and the difference between an emotional support animal and a service animal. Mostly, now we're talking dog, so we're focusing in on the dog aspect of it. But there are other things that we can deal with as well. So what?
Can we just jump in because Ryan, you already answered one of the questions I was going to ask you, but maybe we'll drill down a little bit of it. There's a picture on your website of you with a dog, and so I was going to ask you your dog's name. I'm taking it that's Pico.
That is Pico, yes.
And tell us about Pico.
Pico he is roughly about 70 pounds. He is a yellow lab that I got matched with through Canine Companions for Independence. They're the largest service dog organization in the country, founded in 75, I believe. So they were doing matches, 15 years prior to even the ADA being passed. That tells you how far ahead of the curve and that the level of commitment that they have to their program.
Yeah, they're an amazing organization, and we have a campus here in Northern California in Santa Rosa, and it is a state-of-the-art facility. So if you get a chance, I think they provide tours or something, but definitely check it out before you do show up. How long have you had Pico?
So I got matched with Pico in February of 2014.
Good.
We're about to pass the 6-year mark next week, or am I doing the math right? I think it'll be 6 years next week.
Wow, are you going to give her a beer for her anniversary?
No. That is a absolute no.
All right, good idea.
For a service dog. Yeah, oops. So and you can correct me, Ryan, and I'll just say on air, we have not met. I've just read your bio, but it seems like, if I read it correctly, that you're in the D.C. area. Is that correct?
Yeah, D.C., Virginia. I kind of vacillate between all of it, but yeah, that's accurate.
So I mean, I spent a little time there myself, so I know a little bit. But so when you're out and about in D.C., how does actually I didn't ask, is Pico a he or a she? Maybe I should have been listening. I think we used the.
No, Pico is a he.
Pico is a he. How does he do? I mean, D.C. is a pretty hopping place. How does that?
He's awesome.
Work?
He's awesome, and I like to always give credit where it's due. I mean, yes, I've been his handler for going on 6 years, as I mentioned, but I always tell people that the credit really goes to the organization, the trainers, and in particular also the volunteer puppy raisers who spend the first 18 months or so, roughly, give or take, volunteering in their own time, resources, and energy to basically raise these guys from 8 weeks to about 18 months. Um, between their generosity and then the folks at the campus who do the sort of advanced training work that really makes them service dogs. By the time I get Pico, he's roughly about 2 years old, as most of the dogs are, and he comes trained.
Yeah.
There is no other way in the universe I could do that without the guidance and support that they give, even post match, which is also very important. I think that's unique, especially to CCI. We keep in touch with them as handlers and graduates of the program throughout the life of the match. But from the get, Pico is trained to work tremendously well.
And what can we ask what he does for you as his service?
Sure. He's got roughly, I think, 40 or 50 commands in his arsenal, and much of that is directional, so that as we're out, I can have him on my left side, my right side, in front of me, behind me, just where I need him to be based on where we're at, what we're doing, and what we're navigating. But throughout his day-to-day, he'll help me with picking up items that I've dropped, which as a wheelchair user is a big one. It alleviates a lot of the stress on my body. He'll help with doors, drawers, light switches, retrieving items that I need if I've not only dropped them, but if I've left them on the table or I've left them somewhere else. And I can work with him to say, hey, I need you to go grab that. If it's within his eye line and it's not surrounded by 1,000 other things, I can usually work with him to grab what I need. Those are his biggies, but he's got a lot of great skill, and you spend every working and waking hour next to a dog, you're going to learn a lot about each other. So his personality is great too, and we have a lot of fun even when we're working. It's great.
Yeah, a true partnership.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna, as a layperson, I'm gonna ask, because our dog, who admittedly is only 14 months old, so he's still a puppy. He'll go pick stuff up, and it's usually the stuff he wants to pick up, not necessarily stuff we ask him to. In fact, he doesn't pick up the stuff we ask him to pick up. So that on its own is incredibly impressive. Those commands, when you tell him to go pick something up, I would imagine that there isn't a name for what you're having him pick up. Does he just know the term pick up, and then directionally he knows what he's supposed to get? How does that work?
It depends on the item, but like a common one, for example, he does have some names for some items, but largely it's a single command for retrieve. It's called the get command through CCI, but a common one, for example, is his leash. He has a specific word, for his leash. I can say get your leash, and it's usually attached to him, and it's usually just something where I've dropped it or I've lost my grip on it, and somehow I need him to pick it up and give it to me, and I can say get your leash, and he'll grab it in his mouth, and we'll find some way for him to deliver it to me, whether it's coming up directly in front of me or on my lap, depending on where he is, and I'll grab it from him, and that's part of that. But generally, it's if I've dropped my keys, I don't say get my keys. It's usually I've dropped my keys and they're in close proximity in his eye line, and he knows kind of that that's the thing that I need, and I'll just say, Pico, get it. And if he doesn't immediately move, it's more of I have to get him excited. He's a lab, so food can often work as a motivator for a lab. But generally, the moment he realizes that, whether it's through verbal encouragement or through food, that that's the thing I need him to get. So he'll start to go toward it, and I'll go, yeah.
Right.
And once he realizes that's the thing I want him to zero in on, he'll paw at it. He'll try to get his mouth on it, whatever he needs to do, and then within a couple of seconds, I'll have it.
Right. Using your voice to stimulating and arouse him will get him moving in that right direction.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'm sure Pico's this great emotional support for you as well.
Yeah, you can. That kind of comes bundled with the territory.
Yeah.
And I always say this: I have, even at work, regardless of how stressful my work day gets, you can't have a bad day at work when you're next to a lab all day. You just can't.
Well, I think that's a great point. Do you find, yeah, it must, the social aspect of having a dog, people approaching you and communicating with you probably can be, well, I don't know, maybe sometimes a problem as well. We were talking to a canine officer the other day, and one of his biggest pet peeves was people coming up to the dog without asking permission first to touch it. Do you run into that problem?
Oh, that's definitely part of, it's I describe it as, it's par for the course that it's going to happen. You can't escape it. But again, CCI does a great job, especially, Pico's my first service dog, so I had to get a lot of I've learned a lot over the last couple of years, but they do a good job about how to handle the public and what to say and how to say it and how to engage with those kinds of interactions where it's like unwarranted or unwanted. By and large, generally, I welcome, at least, I don't welcome the unwanted part, and we're trying to work, and he needs to stay focused, and so that can be distracting. But what I do welcome is, folks who have questions, they're curious, they want to learn. That's great, and I generally am a willing, person who's willing to do that kind of engagement. That being said, like any other human, there are days when all I want to do is get my coffee and go through the line and get caffeinated and maybe then deal with it.
Right.
And yeah, and so the preempting, warning that CCI jokingly and they'll seriously gives their graduates is there is no such thing as a quick errand anywhere.
That's a good point.
And it's true.
Even with, and I wanted to go back and check, but in the picture on your website, so here he's wearing a harness that says "Do Not Pet" and a leash that says "Do Not Pet," and even then, you still get people coming up.
Even then, it happens, and I added the neon leash wrap because apparently the Velcro signage on his vest was not enough.
Well, you're really becoming an ambassador for CCI and service dogs as a whole.
I really try, and it's honestly the least I can do for everything organization has done for me.
Right. Yes.
And
incredible.
so it's honestly the least I could do, and it's something that has completely changed my life, and so I get a kick out of it. Like things like this, I have fun with it.
Well, thanks for sharing that with us. Now, when we come back from our break, we're going to kind of delve into the emotion. Well, the Department of Transportation is now going to loosen their policies in regard to letting the airlines dictate more of their regulations and requirements about having emotional support animals on their flights. And we're going to come back and we're going to talk about that a little bit more, get in depth. We're going to talk to Ryan. Ryan's going to give us a couple insights on it, but we're going to talk about news stories and maybe some nightmare stories about what goes on the planes, and look forward to that. So hang tight. We'll be back in just a few minutes. You're listening to KSVY 91.3 Sonoma. And we're back. Welcome back to Talking Dog.
I think we're back.
Yeah, we're back.
All right, good.
Yeah. Don't mess up. Ryan, are you with us?
I am.
All right, excellent.
All right, so Ryan, while we were at break, I feel like this. I wish it was the Johnny Carson show. I mean, that was many moons ago. In fact, a lot of people don't even know who that is. But they would come back. We're back from the break, and they'd always touch on something they covered during the break. But you commented that you were in radio.
Yeah, back in my college days. I miss it.
And what kind of show did you have?
I actually had two different ones. I was fortunate enough during my time to have two semesters worth. And one semester, I basically did, early morning show Monday, and I did one show that was soundtracks and show tunes, basically.
Uh-huh.
And then I did another that was just, like, I don't know, a handful of, random singer-songwriters that I found that I liked that were kind of flying under the radar. kind of artists.
Promoting the small guy.
Yeah, a big thing in college radio.
What's all right, one singer-songwriter that's might be your top 5?
Actually, I just saw him in concert about 2 weeks ago. His name is Ron Pope. He's actually gotten a little bit more of a following over the last decade or so, but he's definitely one of my favorites.
What was the venue? Was it there's a neat theater in downtown DC? Then there's what's that one just outside Virginia? Fox something?
No. Well, there's Wolf Trap.
Wolf Trap. I knew it. Fox.
But the one that I went to was called Union Stage. It's not far from here in Virginia where I'm. It's about roughly 20 minutes from me, if that.
Tell me the person's name again. I missed it. I must have missed it.
Ron Pope.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll check it out, and hopefully our audience will check it out too. So let's delve into this ESD. We're just going to call it ESD, ESA, emotional support animal and emotional support dog. Now, emotional support dogs are, what is that definition? Emotional support is a companion animal, cats, dogs, mice, rabbits, birds, snakes, hedgehogs, rats, mini pigs, ferrets, and etc., that provide therapeutic benefit to its owner through companionship. The animal provides emotional support and comfort to the individual with psychiatric disabilities and offer mental and other mental impairments. The animal is not specifically trained to perform tasks for a person who suffers from these emotional disabilities. Now, that's a big difference, and it's one of the major differences between emotional support animals and service animals. Service animals are defined as dogs, and now sometimes miniature horses are entering the world of service animals, but they are individually trained to do work and perform tasks for people with disabilities. Whether they're confined to a wheelchair, other, seizure alert dogs, and that sort of thing. Deaf dogs, dogs that help the deaf. And so what's going on with the Department of Transportation is they're going to allow the airlines more leeway on what they allow on their planes
or don't allow.
Don't allow, right. So a couple of things. I was watching this before we came in. Was a woman wanted to bring her peacock onto a flight, and she wasn't allowed to. But she actually brought the peacock to the airport after the airline had told her 3 separate times over the phone not to bring the bird, and she didn't make the flight. But there are a lot of things going on with these emotional support animals, and I believe that the whole system is being abused by people who are trying to fake these animals or fake the certificates to try to get on the flight and bring their animals for free.
Well, we did a little research to prepare for the interview. Even if it's they're real certificates or certification of some sort, they may not technically be fake. Just in doing some quick search on the web, there were a lot of companies that made these certificates available. So when you start getting the Google ads populating near the top of the screen, that tells you there's some money in the business. And I think that's part of what got us intrigued in this, because as you were pointing out, Ryan, just listening to the relationship you've got with Pico and all the things that Pico does for you, I think people start to understand the distinction between service and support. And I'm just going to say it. It's a chasm, but I don't think that's really what most people recognize. Is that fair?
Well, I think it's fair to say it that way. The thing though that I want to emphasize is that, like I said, I got Pico from CCI, and there is not, never has been. Well, from a legitimate standpoint, there is not, never has been an official registry or official certification CCI did not give me a piece of paper that said, now he's officially registered. Like that. So the organizations that do this, the ones that you can Google and pay $100 for, the legitimate handlers know that it's all perpetuating this myth that these certificates and these registries exist, and they don't.
Right. It's
yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Well, it's just it's the abuse. It's there are a whole bunch of issues incorporated with it. Not having an actual national registry and a certificate that says that your dog / animal, I think it's going to come down to more dog than any other animal, that the dog should be tested on temperament, training, sociability. There should be some benchmark test that you can get the certificate. I think similar to like the Good Canine Citizenship Test, where you have to get this certificate and prove to a body of people.
That does kind of exist a little bit. Actually, you and I talked about this yesterday briefly. But there is Assistance Dogs International, which is the accrediting body that you speak about. Actually, they're the ones who are offering these benchmarks for behavior and sort of public access benchmarks that organizations like CCI and there are others. I don't have the list in front of me, but ADI does keep a list of the organizations that use the ADI standard of accreditation to say that that's the benchmark our dogs meet.
Yes. I'm going to read a paragraph here from an article in Psychology Today. One person who is concerned about the proliferation of bogus service animal registries is Steve Zawistowski, Senior Science Advisor for the ASPCA. When I asked him about the cottage industry that has arisen around fake assistant animal paraphernalia and phony service dog certifications, he replied, "It's the cesspool of human-animal relationships that no one wants to talk about." And when I asked a Department of Justice agent about the proliferation of Internet service dog registrations agencies, she simply said they are frauds. So it's really, they know, more and more people are recognizing that, $169 is going to get you a piece of paper with some, who knows if even they are a real mental health professional. And they're just, it's what a money-making scheme seems like.
But and even if I can jump in for a second, I was looking specifically at some of the airline policies and just like how they've articulated them in light of these coming changes, and I think it was Delta that even on their FAQs for the general public, there's a question on the bottom or near the bottom that says, what if my dog is registered on the, I don't know what the ND is called, like the National Registry of Service Animals or whatever the acronym is. And I immediately just Googled it to see what kind of, what the outfit was. I'd never heard of it. I know it's not legit, but I wanted to see what came up when I Googled it. And it is exactly what you're saying, which is this outfit that says for 100 and some odd, we'll give you a certificate. But what struck me more wasn't that it existed. I know those things exist, but the fact that Delta sort of acknowledges it as a thing, I think perpetuates its perceived legitimacy.
Yes.
And that's a problem.
Well, Delta seems to be one of the airlines that are kind of moving forward on new restrictions and requirements for ESDs and ESAs. I downloaded the acknowledgement form. They've got to provide, the traveler has to provide documents 48 hours before they get on the plane. They have to have signatures from a vet with all the vaccination records, rabies, microchips, all this information from the vet. They need license number and a signature. I don't know. And then there's a whole mental health aspect of it too, and you're required to have a signature from your therapist or psychologist.
So, I think the challenge that happens though is that, and I think others have spoken to this, and so I'm not creating new ground here, but the challenge that happens is that when you say as an airline, you must provide these things, and they're actually clear. They specify it in this case for ESA. They say that for service dogs, it's a little bit different. I don't have their verbiage in front of me, but in fairness to the folks who aren't trying to fraudulently engage the system, by saying to somebody, "Hey, you must provide these things within 48 hours of flight," that is discriminatory, because you're going to have folks, I can guarantee it, who are going to need to make arrangements and don't have that kind of leeway, whether it's an emergency situation or, for whatever reason, and you have to book, 24 hours or whatever the case is, and you're not going to have that window. And it's not, I think, a fair practice to then say, well, you can't have your ESA with you.
Well, I think with the service dogs, with that registry that they're creating, that might be easier for an actual true service animal dog to, have that. It's, like you've got that clear pass that's like, okay, you're ready to go. We got you on the system. You're a registered user with us. But with the ESAs and ESDs, it might be that you just leave the dog at home.
Well, you raise a really, really interesting point. We've got, let's be honest, anytime any one of us gets on a flight anywhere, we've been checked forward, backward, sideways, up and down against lists or multiple lists. It would seem that the same thing should exist and could exist for either service animals or support animals. I mean,
again, I think the challenge that has come up with that idea, which has been posed by people previously, is that you get into privacy concerns with folks' medical data and what you include and how you include it, and security. It becomes a huge issue. And that's, I think, one of the reasons that the idea has kind of stalled. There are probably others that I'm not fully aware of at the moment, but that's a big one.
Well, hopefully with all these changes, something is going to spark, and the more we talk about it, and people like you who are out there advocating and trying to make a positive change on this, it's going to come forward more and more.
Well, I would think you could disconnect too. I mean, HIPAA is going to theoretically limit the transfer of medical information, and you could probably stop it at that list. Like, it could be justified, but the condition that supported the service animal or support animal doesn't have to be listed in the registry. But it would seem, and again, I'm sure a million people have suggested it, but it's an issue. I mean, clear, and just to get to some of this too, Ryan, I think we don't want to put you on the spot, but one of the comments you've at least expressed earlier, I think, with Gardner, was the more competition for limited space, legitimate or not, it becomes an issue. Is that correct?
It becomes an issue in the sense that for the folks that I look at it more like this: for the folks that spend their energy trying to, cheat a system that they shouldn't be, it creates a sense from folks when I go out that all of a sudden I'm now responsible for the experiences that somebody else had with a service animal or an ESA that was fraudulently presented. So then I, as a handler with Pico, who has next to zero problems in public, have to deal with people's perceptions that have been fraudulently skewed.
Right.
And that's the bigger problem for me. When we fly, there, and again, I think Delta did mention this. They say, like, it can't, it being, when you have a service animal on the plane, that it shouldn't protrude into the aisle, that it can't be more than, the width of the seat, those kinds of parameters and those things. And the way that I've sort of dealt with it, I mean, they say that you should be able to, one of the things that Delta says is that if you can't fit your service animal, basically in bulkhead is how they put it in their literature, that you should basically occupy a second seat, pay for a second seat if you need to. Now Pico's roughly 70 pounds, so it's hard to say he's gonna not occupy more than one seat in bulkhead at my feet. But generally, what that means is when I'm flying, I try to make sure that if I'm flying with somebody, which is often the case, not always, that we're seated together, and so it's basically Pico has the width of my seat and whoever I'm flying with,
right?
And then all of a sudden the problem was alleviated.
One of the stories that I read about one of the horror stories was that this person got bumped on the plane because their ESD dog was a Great Dane, and it required the seat. And this poor person who probably had to go somewhere had to give up their seat because of this dog. And I'm just thinking, like, well, here's a person who is trying, I don't know if they were scamming the system or not, but here it is. And you can't even ask them. There's no way for them. You can't ask them if you're real. It's just, you just have to take their word for it. And I can guarantee that a lot of these things are false. And I can't believe I find it so frustrating that someone's having to give up their seat for this situation.
It's a difficult situation to navigate because, like you said, the questions that you can legally ask are limited. I will say, for whatever it's worth, and there are some nuances that do exist from this, but what we're talking about with flight is actually the Air Carrier Access Act, which is a separate piece of legislation from the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. So they're related, and they're written in some ways very similar, but there's some nuance there with the language, and it's one of the reasons why the airlines have some leeway that other businesses on the ground don't.
Yes. Well, here's the current definition of the ACA Access Act. Current definition: any animal that is individually trained or able to provide assistance to a qualified person with a disability, or any animal shown by documentation to be necessary for the emotional well-being of a passenger.
And I think directly under the ADA, it specifically says dogs, and I still believe miniature horses, although I think that's changing. So again, there's some leeway with the language. It's subtle, but it's there.
Yeah, and however small a miniature horse can be, I don't really see them in the cabin of an airplane.
I mean, we're talking bigger than a Great Dane.
Well, yeah. And
that's a big animal.
Yeah. Well, let's take a break, and I want to get into some more of the stories of people traveling with these things, and it's humorous at the same time as it's appalling at some of the things that happen due to this abuse of the system. And we will be back in just a couple moments. And we're back, talking dog.
You might not be back.
I might not be back. I am definitely back. What are you talking about? Ryan, are you with us?
I'm still here.
Oh.
Yes, you are definitely here. So let's talk about the people who are actually being fraudulent with their service animals. One of the big arguments that they say is it's a victimless crime. And that's not necessarily true, because when you abuse the system, there's the businesses can run into problems. Other service dog handlers can get into trouble, and the dog itself and the dog owner. And we can talk a little bit about each of these issues. But the cost of doing business. No one wants to eat at a restaurant where a dog is begging for food and just uncontrolled and being a nuisance. And if your dog isn't trained to sit there by your side or lay down under the table, then that can affect the business owner's business. People might not want that and will leave the restaurant or stop being a patron of that business because they allow people in the restaurant with ill-behaved dogs. I know that with service dogs, they are trained to lay down under a table and not move unless required. And that takes a lot of work. That's a heavy thing to do, is to teach a dog to lie down and stay under all sorts of different circumstances.
And to that point, if I can just plug this
Yeah, go
out
ahead.
real quick,
Yeah.
so CCI has their own breeding program, and so because they breed for a lot of things in genetics, and they try and create a line of dogs that are genetically more likely to succeed. But even within that group, I think the most recent stat from them is that 80% of the dogs, because of the high standard that they hold, 80% of the dogs, I'm sorry, they end up in what's called a change of career status,
Right.
which means they don't pass the program, and they end up being either adopted by folks or they as house pets or some other thing, but they don't make the cut as a service dog because the standard, to your point, is that high.
Yes, it's incredibly high. And just to tell our audience, that's a great way to get a older dog. Get your go to one of these service dog agencies and organizations and put your name on a list. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but you can get a really great dog that way.
When we say older dog, we don't really mean older. You mean not a puppy.
Not a puppy.
Yeah.
Sub-adult. They've gone through the first order of training, and while they might still chase small furry mammals, they will make wonderful house pets.
And just quickly on that note, we talked about this last week. When you do think about the type of dog that you want to acquire or adopt, also think about whether you want a puppy or not, because that's a big decision. So this is a great option for people that don't want to go through the puppy mode again, because it's a lot of work.
And go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Some of the things are some of the reasons, and again, I can only speak for my experience with talking to and working with folks from Canine Companions, but some of the reasons that these dogs end up with change of career, they're minor. But when it comes to working as a service dog, they don't always immediately know what the nature of the future handler's disability is going to be, and so they take no chance.
Right.
But as far as a dog you could possibly adopt or whatever the case may be, the thing that got them kicked out of the program may be a non-issue for you as a person who wants a pet.
Yes. Yeah. When I first started handling dogs, I was one of these people almost. I didn't claim it as being an emotional support dog, but I would bring these dogs that were in my care anywhere and everywhere I could. And now that I'm got much more experience in me, I look back and I kind of cringe on that kind of narcissist side of dog handling and dog ownership of, look at me, I'm this great person and I have this dog, and look at, I'm at the coffee shop and I look so cool with my dog here, or I'm in any number of places in the public, and it's an interesting aspect to the human condition of look at me, I'm a great dog owner, or it's like an attention thing. And I cringe to think of what I was doing back then, and I recognize now what it is, especially with the issues that are coming up with people abusing the title of emotional support animal.
Well, and I think the one that abuse we hear about more often than anything is with the airlines. But we dug a little bit more, and Ryan, I'm sure you have a lot more on this than we found. But there's now you look at planes, you look at ferries if you're in areas where there's water transportation. You look at taxi cabs and the new taxi cab, although they don't call themselves that, and they're not really, but Ubers, Lyfts of the world. All of these modes of transportation pose similar challenges. Is that fair?
That is 100% fair, and I want to be mindful of why I'm here today. But I will tell you that we could have an entirely separate show with my experiences, and actually a big part of my advocacy that I'm becoming publicly known for is that very thing. It's the fight with Uber and Lyft and rideshare. It is more of a fight than it should be, and like I said, that's a separate show. I won't go on that soapbox right now, but it's a big one.
Well, and I could see why it would be a big one, and that's frankly one of the reasons that there's a controversial law that was passed in California that went into effect a month ago. In the case of everything else, well, maybe not everything, but close to everything else other than Uber and a Lyft, as examples, is they're owned by an entity. And the reality is an Uber and a Lyft are owned by independent contractors, or at least Uber claims that, and Lyft does as well.
Yeah.
Then there's go ahead.
And again, I'm going to try not to go on a soapbox here, but I think Uber and Lyft sort of talk out of both sides of their mouth on this issue.
Yeah.
On the one hand, they say we have, all our drivers are supposed to follow the ADA, and this behavior of denial of service is unacceptable, and all the right things. And then the flip side of that conversation is they come back and say when there's legal things into play, they say, well, we're not a transportation company, we're a tech company, and so therefore the laws don't apply to us the same way, and it ends up being this big circle of an argument.
Well, I want to read a paragraph. We were talking about the detrimental effect of having a fake ESD or ESA. It's the effect of the dog owner. When a person takes an untrained or fake service dog into public, they are disregarding the needs of the business, service dog teams, and the dog. This shows a fundamental character flaw. In some cases of faking a service dog, depending on where and how the person falsely claims their dog is a service dog, they could face fines, jail time, loss of government benefits, including Social Security and Medicare, and or loss of the dog. Moreover, it is fundamentally unethical to take an untrained or fake service dogs into the public access work. So it's interesting and it's serious. The person faking the service dog has a direct effect on people like you, Ryan, who have a service dog, a legitimate use for it, and you guys come under this whole new microscope by people who aren't informed about what's going on with these animals.
100%, and I think it goes back to the point you raised earlier, Gardner, which is, part of why this is able to persist as it has is because the two questions that legally exist are broad.
Right.
And it's easy to lie about them.
And those questions, let's just remind everybody what those questions are. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, is that animal required as a result of a disability, and what tasks can the animal perform? And the education piece comes in two pieces here, because how many businesses are aware of the limits of what they can ask, and the ones that are so afraid of getting sued that they don't.
Right. They don't want to be labeled as the place that doesn't welcome service dogs, and yet they're going to allow silly Sally from down the street bring in their angry Chihuahua who's just going to cause trouble, bark and nip at people and all these other things that give everybody the bad rap.
I'll tell you, I do chuckle a bit, and perhaps I shouldn't, but it does make me chuckle a bit when I'm out in public and I go to various places, and some stores and some restaurants have some signage directly on their door that actually says, "We welcome service dogs." So to me, that says, okay, you're familiar with, perhaps more than the average, you're familiar with the law, but my brain internalizes it and goes, that sign might as well say, "We follow federal law."
Right.
So I have a fun time balancing my internalization of that sign with also just knowing that it does speak to, maybe they are aware of the two questions. Maybe they do know more than the average business about what the limits are. So I actually, that tells me that that's possibly a place where I might want to go, because they may be more aware than the average place.
Well, the other thing, just to jump in here too, there is the law, and I think what we've touched on here is it's it is open to interpretation to a degree, or more than a degree. But then there's also the reality that just about everybody today, has a television station or in their pocket. And whether they're on the right side or the wrong side of the law, they can definitely create a ton of noise. And I think that's equally a challenge, perhaps even a bigger challenge for a lot of these companies and entities, because they just don't want to deal with that.
Right. And the person gets insulted because they won't let their their peacock on the plane, or whatever, that the business owner is going to get hit because they get called out on this, even though they're correct. Everybody's going to feel sorry for the person who's got the emotional support animal or dog, and it could be fraudulent even.
Well, and that one probably. Go ahead, Ryan.
I'm sorry. I was going to say I'm sort of smiling because you say everybody, and then I sit here with my advocacy and all the people that I end up having to educate about that. Not everybody.
Well, okay, thank you, Ryan. Call me out on that. Yes, definitely. Absolutely, not everybody.
Well, and that one, let's. In the old days, pre-cell phone, we probably wouldn't have heard about the peacock trying to get on the plane, or a bunch of these others. But the reality is now there's things that are, and there's going to be people on both sides of that issue, and as a company or someone just trying to run a business, you just don't want to have to deal with it, and you have to, and I think. We're just, in that sense, I don't know what to say, because I don't think that's going to go away,
No, but remember, emotional support animals are not, it's for airplane traffic, airplane travel, and housing situations. That's really all it is. So anybody who brings the dog into the restaurant saying it's an emotional support dog or a therapy dog, they really aren't allowed into the restaurant. And if they're going to make noise and stuff like that, it's crazy. It's very troubling.
That's right, and you've hit on that. There's actually I could share it with you if you'd like, but there's actually a great chart that CCI produced that actually has like a comparison between ESA, service dogs, dogs in training, and they check off which group has what protection. And a service dog is the only one that really is protected across the board.
Right.
When you were talking about behavior, it reminds me of there's an event that CCI does on an annual basis, and it's a fundraising event that they hold, and a lot of folks, including myself, would go and we have our dogs, and so there's this. It's an annual benefit, and there's a room. We're in this big ballroom typically, and this fundraising event is taking place, and I would say the room itself, between all the handlers and the organization, it's a ballroom that's got about maybe 100 or 200 people, and almost everyone there has a dog, and they're all quietly under the table. Like if you had walked in that room, you wouldn't even know that there's 100 dogs in that room.
Yep.
Because they're just so well behaved.
Well, that might be a good point to wrap this up for the week. But gosh, there's so many other things that we haven't even touched on this subject. We're going to probably have to do another show on this very topic. Ryan, I want to thank you so much for joining us. You added a whole bunch of stuff to our show that made it great.
Well, it made it great, and thank you. It's just I love it when we can pull a show together like this where we get really rock solid information out to people, because this is you've covered a lot of ground here in detail that's I think important for people to get a handle on.
And I appreciate allies like you who seek me out and bring me on and use your platform to do that education. It's really it makes me happy, and it's always great to have allies in this fight.
Well, Dave, thanks for being another great show.
And this is awesome. This is I love this.
I want to send people to our website to get more information about us. It's Talkin' Dog, TALKIN. DOG.com. Thank you, Dave. It's a challenge for me.
You got it. You had it last night at trivia.
Oh yeah, that's our trivia name. Please check us out. I'm also going to be at the Vintage House next Wednesday, the 12th at 10 o'clock, doing a talk about how to avoid the contact of dogs, geared to anybody. But this is I'm going to have a senior. Everybody is welcome. Vintage House. It's on the website as events. And thanks so much. You're listening to 91.3 KSVY Sonoma. Dave, we'll see you next week. Ryan, thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.